I'd like to welcome back to the podium Malcolm Hopwood from the Ramsay Healthcare, Professor of Psychiatry, University of Melbourne, and co-chair of Equally Well. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, so I don't have any budget announcements, just to be crystal clear, I'm sorry. What I'm going to talk about this morning, we thought it was very appropriate for our second meeting to kind of pause for a moment and think about where are we up to with Equally Well, and more importantly than Equally Well per se, where are we up to with this issue? We're going to start by looking backwards at where we started about 5 years ago and finish with some comments about, so what next? Some of which, through announcing the funding, the Minister has kind of outlined a little bit, which is good. That's not a bad thing, I guess. No bad thing at all. I guess we're all very aware of the issue of poor physical health and increased mortality in people with mental illness. That's why we're here. So I don't need to talk to you about those figures. But I think it's very important to state that, beginning with the consensus statement and now in the work of Equally Well Australia, very important that that starts on a solid evidence-based platform. That if we're going to progress this issue, we need to be able to do it in a way that has logic, that has purpose, and has evidence to back it up. And a lot of the evidence at the time was contained in some key addenda to the Mental Health Commission report, the Equally Well consensus statement, and in two relevant statements from New Zealand that I'm sure many of you have read, that outlines very clearly there is a significant body of evidence both about the size and scope of the issue and about some of the solutions. And that one of the many issues is, so what's the gap between knowing that and what we actually implement, which is where we may see ourselves as operating. Equally relevant in creating action is data like this contained, and I acknowledge a sort of conflict of interest in showing something from the College of Psychiatrists, I guess. But this was a really important study the College of Psychiatrists did in collaboration with the Mitchell Institute that looked at the economic cost to Australian society of the reduction in life expectancy associated with severe mental illness. It feels a bit cold at times, doesn't it, to reduce these things to numbers like this. But I can tell you it is very important in creating policy direction. It does go to the scope of the issue. $15 billion is a lot of money. You know, by any reasonable definition, strikes me as a lot of money. And this is not the cost of mental health overall, as we were talking before. This is the cost of increased mortality alone in people with serious mental illness. An enormous cost to our community. The other thing that was evident from the outset with the consensus statement is that the word consensus is a very important part of that statement. We come from a variety of perspectives, which is a wonderful thing. And how we feel about solutions, indeed the issue itself, will vary depending which of those perspectives we come from. In the work for the consensus statement, there was a number of workshops bringing together people from enormous perspectives, and the action items that flowed and key directions had to achieve a level of high consensus. I think that that's a spirit we'd like to feel we've continued in the work of Equally Well, but you may well tell us what you think about that over the next couple of days, as you should. Some 6 key system challenges were identified in that original report, and I put it out to you. You can tell us over the next 2 days how well you think we're doing with each of these areas and to what degree they're still very active, and the answer is no doubt, of course, yes, they are. I'm very interested personally, coming from Victoria, as to what degree or not do some of the outcomes of our recent Royal Commission address any of these things. But key issues around stigma, around diagnostic overshadowing, poor access to general health and mental health services, the issues related to medication. Screening and intervention is something that the evidence review clearly tells us we know what to do, but the evidence also tells us we don't do it, or we don't then act on the findings we make. It's not complicated in a sense. And of course, the issue of service coordination hangs over all of this, of course. As the Minister did mention, that consensus statement was launched in 2017 by Alan Fells, who was then the Chairman of the Mental Health Commission, shaking the hand of some guy that looks a lot like Russell Roberts there. And that was a pretty significant milestone, I think, in progressing this issue. That consensus statement, I think, with full recognition to the Commission, had impact. It did have impact. And I've mentioned some of these, but I just want to emphasise that central to that statement was a sort of holistic, person-centred approach. That in bringing together different perspectives, unless it has that, our chances of success are significantly less. The Commission report quite appropriately made a big issue of service fragmentation. The point of this complex diagram is all the different bits of the service, not to get lost in the detail. The fact it's so bewildering says something in its own right, doesn't it, really, about fragmentation. A key issue that was addressed in that report, and we continue to reflect on in Equally Well Australia, is to what degree do you work alongside those issues with existing service structures, or, as it were, try to create something new? A constant challenge across the sector, really, I think, in mental health, but particularly for this comorbidity. The consensus was no, to enhance and make the existing structures work was generally more feasible, but how to enhance them and to facilitate their better engagement was the question. And I think looking at our recent policy work remains the question in many ways. Pleasingly, that consensus statement played a role then in a cascade of policies since. And I'm not going to go through them all. One of the key ones, of course, was that, no doubt related to the work of the consensus statement, this became a key chapter in one of the 9 key targets in the 5th National Mental Health Plan, which is the first time this comorbidity had been recognised at that level. And I think that's I thought personally, that was a hugely significant thing. And it's been continued to recognised both nationally and globally in a number of ways. A recent part of that Russell's going to talk about later, of course, is in the setting of COVID. We can't ignore COVID. And what we've had to say about vaccination in people with mental illness and management of all COVID issues. Over the last 5 years, what have we seen happen? I mentioned the National Mental Health Plan. I think it's worth acknowledging that in other important bits of work, the recent Productivity Commission report, for example, or the National Agreement about Mental Health and Suicide Prevention, the comorbidity with physical illnesses has featured as a key issue in both of those reports. So it's pleasing to see it is remaining high on the policy agenda. With all of these, whilst Equally Well are very pleased with those results, the nature of our organisation is not to suggest that's because of us. It's clearly because of a collaborative effort. But it's very important to note. And pleasingly, we've seen a number of states now release specific plans looking at how to better manage physical health in comorbidity with major mental illness. Good. Interesting they didn't exist previously in a meaningful way, but good. That's a good thing. We've also seen some local examples because, the membership of Equally Well across over 90 organisations ranges from national to state to very local, including local health service and PHNs and that kind of organisation. And a number of these organisations have produced or been active in producing documentations and policies and activities, right down to the example that I know Russell is very keen on from Mudgee, that I'm sure he'd love to talk to you about at length if you give him half a chance. Really, what's the point there is that the issue is now permeating quite widely. And whilst that might seem obvious to us that that should be the case, the reflection is it wasn't necessarily the case in the past. And I think that is a marker of success for this whole movement. Just a shout out to all of you who are members of Equally Well. and an acknowledgement for the role of each of the members individually as well as equally well as an organisation in this advocacy work. And it's a terrific thing that I personally feel very proud of, to be part of an organisation that's managed to collect people from across the sector in a way that not everything always does in mental health, if we're absolutely honest. Of course, this issue is not unique to Australia, New Zealand. It's a global issue, and data from wherever you look shows the same kind of mortality gap, sadly. And I think due acknowledgement to Russell being very instrumental in creating an international collaborative learning network with partners from the UK, New Zealand, and a number of other countries, really trying to develop the thing that we're very keen on about sharing knowledge and resources to help progress the issue. And that's leading to some really important international meetings, including one in Christchurch next year that I encourage you all to attend if you feel comfortable, as an opportunity to progress the issue further, because clearly we can learn from what others are doing just as they can learn from us. I want to emphasise again that within Equally Well, in moving forward from here, we really see ourselves as a kind of guide to the process, an influencer of process, but not a controller. So our model is the constellation model of collective impact. That's all about facilitating, sharing information and resources, bringing together ideas, promoting, lightweight agreements and governance. We're not here to tell our 90 members what to do. I don't think we'd have much success if we tried, is probably the honest truth. We're here to facilitate, and the kind of movement I'm talking about fits with exactly our overall aim, to really move an issue forward, not about ourselves. So what are our foci now? Three key things. I think we need to keep measuring progress. So any movement needs some sense of where it's heading. One of the key outcomes from the funding that the Minister discussed earlier will be the opportunity to re-look at some of the national mortality and morbidity data. And I think that's a very important project, because I think to keep this issue live, we need to keep reflecting. It's nowhere near done. That would be an absurd suggestion, wouldn't it? So we need to be very active in continuing to look and continue to think about how can this be better still. Oh, sorry, I jumped too quickly. We want to continue to facilitate collaboration. For an issue that permeates every corner of the country and every corner of the globe, the answer clearly is a collaborative one. No one organisation is going to produce an outcome for this issue. That's kind of self-evident, but it's interesting, what are the forces that actually promote collaboration? They're often undercooked, I think you could argue. And in a sense, what our aim is to really get everyone on the same page, collaborating, sharing, not competing in any way. And to continue to promote awareness of the issue fairly obviously. One of the things we've done, and apologies that I couldn't fit the photos of all of our current ambassadors in this slide, we've created an ambassador program that's a way of reaching out to the different sectors involved in this issue. And to all of our ambassadors who are present, welcome and thank you. Really, we think this is an important way of kind of keeping up the portfolio, if you like, and keeping up engagement. And we think that's been very fruitful in continuing to keep this issue top of focus. Projecting forward then, what things are we going to be looking at over the next little while in Equally Well Australia? Continuing to doing what we're doing. And I think I want to acknowledge that the funding the Minister announced actually really is the start funding in many ways. We've been running off the smell of an oily rag with very hard work from people like Russell and Lee, who's somewhere in the room, and occasional contributions from Dave and I, and many contributions from all of you. So this funding really will help us move things along a little bit. I've mentioned we're going to re-look at data, and I think data is critical. Mounting arguments about change in the absence of data is incredibly difficult. We want to continue to develop our resource base. Many of you who've spent time on our website will know it's a hub for sharing. This is something somebody's produced, this might be useful for you. We want to develop that even further to avoid the classic problem of reinvention of the wheel. Many of the interventions we're talking about, it's just about getting organised and started, and if someone else has done that work and you can benefit from it, why not? And I'm thankful to those of you who generously have given your resources to the website already and encourage you to continue to do so. And I'll continue to thank you if that encourages you to continue to do it. We've also put considerable effort recently into developing a community of practice. So really getting together all of the people involved for opportunities around ongoing education. Thankfully now beginning to be face-to-face again, but largely electronic in recent times. To develop kind of, again, across the sector and across all of the relevant sectors, people with expertise and specific interest in this area, to really encourage that. We have examples where people will tell us, if I'm the person in my service, in my group, in my organisation who's promoting this issue, occasionally there can be a lonely spot, right? If you're the person really pushing something hard and not much is happening. Being part of a community who's working on an issue can therefore feel a very welcoming spot, and that's something we're looking forward to continue to promote. Look, in sum, it's great to have you here with us, because equally well is a community. That's really something I'd like to stress to you all. To encourage you as part of that community to continue to communicate with us, so subscribe to our newsletter, join up, put your link on our webpage. It's highly expensive, $0. You're very welcome, and we really, as part of a facilitator of a broader community, really encourage you to do that and to share what's worked. That's what we really, really want. Interventions that work, have succeeded, are pragmatically possible, and others can benefit from that experience. We'll all be better for it. Thank you very much for your attention.
So I'm asking you to consider adding an ambassador who represents the disability sector.
Okay.
So not all CALD people have a mental illness, not all LGBTIQ plus people have a mental illness, so not all people in those intersectionalities have mental illnesses, but you know, we all do at times have a mental illness. So I think having representation for disabled people in that ambassadorship is really important, because I've come across a lot of ongoing gatekeeping issues as a disability advocate and an autism advocate.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. Certainly please don't for a moment think there was something specifically intentional or exclusionary there, and a good prompt. I think, and a clear acknowledgement that despite the way our service systems are designed, if you indeed have one type of issue, the odds that you have another are greater than otherwise expected. That's absolutely correct. So I think very happy to take that suggestion on board. Yeah, no, happy to. Thank you.